What's the big fuss about the gay cake decision? Occupying Till He Comes at Southwest Prophecy Ministries. Friends, welcome to our Last Days Beacon program for today. This is David Schnitker. Thanks for tuning in. It is a great privilege to have Bill Olson back on the program today. Bill is a constitutional lawyer in the Washington, D.C. area, and as such, his law firm is on the front lines of liberty in America's courts. As such, Bill's firm has brought more than 100 cases before the Supreme Court. We began discussing one of the recent cases last week known as the gay cake decision. Makes me hungry just thinking about it. Well, Bill, welcome back to the program today.
Well, glad to do it, David.
Last week we established that your law firm was involved in the presentation of this case before the Supreme Court, which has rendered a verdict recently. But let's begin by, Bill, if you could summarize the issues leading to this case and the merits of it that actually brought it to the attention of our highest court.
Yeah, this is really one of several cases that have occurred of this type involving people who are attempting to adhere, businesses that are attempting to adhere to biblical principles as the government becomes more and more coercive in falling in line with the LGBT agenda, and what was once an effort to have tolerance and decriminalization of homosexual behavior has now progressed way past that, way past into acceptance, but now forcing participation of businesses in same-sex weddings, no matter what the religious views of the business owners are. And in this case, there was a cake store in Colorado, Masterpiece Cake Shop, owned by a baker, Jack Phillips. He offered to sell the homosexual couple anything they wanted, but he wouldn't design and celebrate their wedding by creating a cake, a wedding cake. And of course, weddings are religious events. The ceremony is a religious event. And the same-sex couple was treated respectfully, although they did not treat him respectfully. And they simply wanted to coerce him to serve their wedding, even though there were many other bakers who were willing to do it. So we're now in an era where what happened out there was there is a so-called public accommodations law, which is way beyond any kind of public accommodations law that ever existed in the past. In the past, if you heard the doctrine of public accommodations, it was an innkeeper in England along a rural road which was forced to take people in, even if they didn't want to take them in, so they wouldn't be beaten by robbers. Now, public accommodations laws apply to all businesses selling all goods and all services, basically. And it's a crazy expansion of a common law doctrine that's never been explained, except for the fact we don't want homosexuals involved in sodomy to feel bad about themselves, so we want to force everyone to embrace them and participate with them and facilitate their activities.
Doesn't that in effect make them a superclass of people, a special class?
Well, yeah, I mean, it really does. It gives them super rights. It's so funny that the Constitution and protects many rights that existed at common law, and those are what you'd expect to be super rights. Those are gifts. Those are rights given by God that are just recognized by government. And here you've got rights that are most definitely not given by God, but are forced by government. And here you've got sodomy elevated over religion. Mm-hmm. It's a very sad thing for the nation that is in fact calling good evil and evil good.
Just as an aside, could we say that this particular Masterpiece Bakery, now we're just assuming here, do you think that it's possible that they were targeted? as opposed to this being a random transaction?
Well, there are many of these cases, and in most of them, they appear to be targeting Christians they know run the business. In New Mexico, there was a case involving Elaine Photography. In Oregon, there was a case involving what was called Sweet Cakes. Arlene Flowers is still in the Supreme Court in Washington State. There's a wedding photographer that they went after, and they have the ability to put any Christian business out of business if you accept their theory. Because all you have to do is go in, ask them to do something against their moral conscience, have them refuse, and then you file a complaint with a state agency, and then the same-sex couple doesn't have to do anything because the government pays for the lawyers to begin this administrative process. You don't have a right to a jury. You don't have a right to a judge. It's done before administrative officers who report typically to governors, the Colorado governor being notoriously pro-homosexual. And only after the fact, after you're fined, after you're forced to re-educate your employees about the morality of immorality, then you can sometimes get to a judge. And in this case, the Masterpiece case, we had a very narrow victory, you could say, because they reversed the decision of the Colorado court, which affirmed the Civil Rights Commission's action. But they did it because the Civil Rights Commission was overtly hostile to Christianity. And the implication being, if they were only subtly hostile to Christianity, they could have gotten away with it. So really the breadth of this decision is not known, and the best way to describe it is what Justice Thomas said, which is that the free exercise of religion has lived to fight another day. So we'll see what happens.
So we weren't finished off, but this was not a clear victory for religious liberty or conscience rights.
There has been too much crowing of people working on the case claiming victory when the victory was not very good. Sadly, the challenge to this law did not even challenge the notion that this was a place of public accommodation. And of course, that's a jurisdictional issue. Mm-hmm. The government has no right to tell every business in America how to run its business. Very much the exception was the 1964 Civil Rights Act. Title II of that prohibited discrimination based on race, national origin, but only in a very narrow class of lodging, restaurants, sporting events. So it was very narrow compared to this, because this is every business. And we're living in a world now where pretty soon, if this doctrine is not stopped, you will not find another Christian lawyer, Christian physician, Christian businessman, because the sodomite community can target them for extinction, and they don't even have to do the work. Their political friends who embrace an anti-Christian mentality, who work in the government, will spend taxpayer money putting the Christians out of business and forcing them to re-educate their employees if they want to stay in business and pay large fines.
So the American legal system will have devolved to a Soviet system of basically rendering Christian people of conscience unable to participate in the trades. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and one of our friends and clients of many years, a famous author, M. Stanton Evans, used to talk about how fraudulent it is that the government thinks that you can have a non-religious order which they are defending against religion. But in fact, it's a choice, because secularism, secular humanism, those are all religions too. They're substitutes for religious faith. And the country is going to be guided by either biblical principles or anti-biblical principles. And sadly, many elected officials have taken up the cause of the second camp of the anti-Christian views. That's where we are.
Let me speculate. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It seems like we have two conflations going on. that private enterprise is now being conflated with public accommodation, and that civil rights are being imputed and given to homosexual rights.
Very much so. As a matter of fact, Justice Kennedy, it's sort of infuriating the way he writes, because he starts off saying, oh, Colorado has this long history of prohibiting discrimination. And, of course, that long history of prohibiting discrimination had to do with race, had nothing to do with sexual orientation.
Which is, last I checked, race is an involitional condition, i.e. one is born with one's race, as opposed to homosexual behavior, which is a choice.
Yeah, and homosexual behavior is a behavior, and race is not a behavior.
Right.
It's a status, and this is what's so tragic about the situation we're now in, because it equates the sexual orientation, and please tell me what sexual orientation means. I mean, we used to have sex, which was men and women, then we had gender, which who knows what that is, but at least we had typically men and women, and then homosexual and heterosexual, and now there are entire interest groups that have formed around different definitions of gender and of sexual orientation. So it's such a fluid concept, we don't even know what it means.
Maybe that's by intention.
Maybe so.
Well, most of our listeners are probably not business owners, or perhaps bakery owners also. So they may be thinking to themselves, what difference does it make how this particular ruling came out? And as you're describing it, it is a narrow ruling. It really doesn't resolve other pending cases that are of similar nature. Why is this case of importance to the religious liberties of our listeners?
Well, really the importance is that the free exercise clause is a jurisdictional limit on the power of government. It was always understood, based on Thomas Jefferson and his Virginia statute for establishing religious freedom, and James Madison's Memorial and Remonstrance. It was always understood that religion had a definition. It was not defined in the First Amendment, but it had a definition, and it was defined as the duty we owed to our Creator. It was not a duty we owed to the state. And it was enforceable only by reason and conviction, not by force or violence. And of course, the government is an instrument of force and violence. So if you have an individual who has a religious view, that whether that religious view is Christian or just ethical, religion doesn't mean biblical. It simply means that part of your life that God protects from the interference of the state. And the problem we have at the moment is that the government is testing the limit to try to break down the barriers of free exercise of religion, of the limitations on the government, and pretty soon we're going to have total government control over every aspect of our life. And that is the kind of total control that causes those type governments, like Mao's China, to be totalitarian. We've got to have a limit on the power of government, or we have a totalitarian society, and no one wants to live in that. And I would dare say people involved in same-sex marriages shouldn't want to live in that kind of a country either.
So it's a creeping thing that, if not challenged, will basically continue to metastasize and reach into other areas, whereas you're saying even perhaps same-sex couples at some point may fall victim to the encroaching totalitarianism.
Well, everyone will, if that's the direction we head. If there's no limit to government power, then everything is political. Every aspect of your life is political. Your family is political. Every aspect of religion is political. And so everything is subject to majority vote, elect people, put them into office, give them power, and let them be coercive. That's not the kind of country that we agreed to form when we ratified the Constitution. And let's hope that that's not the kind of government that we and our children live under.
Let me just ask you an ad hoc question, since you're before the court. And of course, there's been a lot of attention given to our latest addition to the court, Neil Gorsuch, and speculation as to which of the justices may be the next one to resign or expire. Are you, and somewhat perhaps hopeful, that in the successive years of the Trump administration, we may see some improvement in terms of the conservative direction of the court?
Well, we certainly hope so. Gorsuch, I think, was an excellent pick. I've never met Gorsuch, but I knew his mom, who was Ann Gorsuch, who was head of the Environmental Protection Agency in the Nixon administration. I was in the Nixon administration also. So by coincidence, I happen to have known his mother, and because of that have had great confidence in him, as well as his educational background, his study of natural law. And I think he's been doing a good job. In this case, the best dissent was by Justice Thomas, who tried to deal with principles by dealing with the free exercise clause. Most of the other opinions were almost off point, but part of it is because of the way the case was presented to them, which was a bit unfortunate, conceding and not attacking the fundamental notion that the government has no jurisdiction over how businesses operate outside of certain narrow exceptions, one being public accommodations of the innkeeper type that we discussed, and the other being race and national origin, for reasons of the amendments, the Civil War amendments, the Constitution, and the fact that behavior and status are very different things.
So in effect, this decision merely kicks the issue down, kicks the can down the road, so to speak, in terms of really resolving the primary issues that should have been resolved with this decision.
Yeah, and we put out an article explaining the way in which this postponed a final reckoning, which is on our website, lawandfreedom.com, and it was published by CNS News and Restoring Liberty and some others, and picked up by Yahoo even. So at least people who subscribe to Yahoo got to read it. So I hope they understood it, and hope they appreciate the significance of this case and this line of cases. There's even another one that the Supreme Court may decide to hear that's been sitting there at the petition stage for some very long time, Arlene Flowers, and we will see whether they grant cert on that.
Well, we are going to be posting your article, the very article that you referenced, on our website. In fact, it'll be going out with our e-newsletter simultaneous with this interview. So, Bill, thanks for taking the time to share about the importance of this case. Give our listeners one more time your website address.
It's Law and Freedom, and that's spelled A-N-D, no ampersand, lawandfreedom.com. And all of our briefs are up there, and we have about 14 we've done, I think, opposing the LGBT agenda, and there's even a tag for that at the bottom. You can take a look at that and see how many different ways this type of behavior is manifesting itself in the law, attempting to take over and change things dramatically.
Well, Bill, thanks for being on the front lines as you fight for the liberties of every religious person in America, every person of conscience, and God bless you as you continue your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you, David.
Friends, Jesus told us before he returned to heaven that we are to occupy until he comes. I believe this means that whatever our calling in life, we are to represent and defend biblical values in our society. Bill and his associates are doing just that in the halls of justice. And we need to pray for him as he represents us in these critical fights for liberty. Well, that's all for today. Please join us next week for another Last Days Beacon program. Until then, this is David Schnitker. Thanks for listening.